Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming and being with us this afternoon. My name is Meg Grudeski. I'm a provisional psychologist here in Whitehorse, and today we're going to have a fun chat about resiliency and how one might respond to situations with resiliency. So my information is here. You are welcome to send me emails, or if you have queries, that's how you get a hold of me. And I just want to extend a thank you again to SOS for having me and for letting me monopolize some time and have an audience for what will hopefully be informative shenanigans that I can offer. So in responding with resilience, I want to talk about what is resilience, but more importantly, I want to talk about what it actually is. I won't give away trade secrets, but I think we have co-opted this term quite a lot, and we're expecting things from people that might not be realistic. I want to talk about identifying types of resistance, so the things that might activate the resilient response we might need to have. I want to talk about activating and fostering resilience. How do we actually grow that as a particular skill or as a particular practice? And then I'd like to maybe brainstorm a few ideas if folks are into it, or offer up other suggestions. And then again, lots of time for questions at the end of this. So without further ado. So resilience, as defined in the wonderful dictionary, has kind of three different facets. So they talk about it being the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, or having this characteristic of toughness. They refer to it as an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune and change. And then they also use it as a definition for the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape. So having this kind of characteristic of elasticity. And the number one image when you Google resilience is this like plant growing through the concrete, which I think is also a very interesting, fun concept to consider. We'll get into that in a minute. So basically, resilience is this idea that we're supposed to be able to bounce back, recover, respond, and that there should be no ill effect to the subject of the resistant force. I think, though, we have most definitely been expected to do more than these definitions. So I think, especially since COVID, but I think under many other conditions that humans live in, being resilient is seen as this, like, I don't know, super amazing trait we should all strive to, when really I'm not sure that that's realistic for how humans operate. So when they refer in the definition, being able to recover quickly, really we mean we're expected to maintain our functional output. And we need to keep doing what needs to be done. So no matter the things that get thrown at us, we're supposed to just keep rolling. Everything is supposed to be smooth. Everything is supposed to just like pick back up, like we're somehow not supposed to be impacted when we have these forces acting upon us. When they refer to adjusting easily, I think that translates to we, the individual, have to alter our function to suit the outside factors. So there's this expectation that like systems or bigger spaces need us, the individual person, to fix what we're doing to fit that agenda rather than the other way around, right? So the onus is on a person within the system to accommodate, not that the forces that are pressing down upon us should have to change. And then finally, this idea that we should just spring back. So again, we're supposed to change our inner functions to fit external environments, which is in essence a betrayal of our own needs. I think sometimes when we say, oh, you're so resilient, we're really referring to like, wow, a bunch of shit happened to you and you just keep going and you didn't say anything and you didn't raise a ruckus and you didn't ask for any extra additional supports. Yay, you're so resilient. And there is a probably not surprising part of me coming through where I don't like that. I think that we expect people to be resilient when really we need systems to not be so shitty. And also it's a betrayal of the individual person's needs to just say like, wow, you're really great at taking a bunch of hits. And so I want to highlight that my particular lens on this is I don't really like when people say that they're resilient. And I wish that we didn't expect people to respond with what is this sort of standard of resilience. And I'm going to definitely talk to you more about what I think resilient responses look like. So again, the number one image when you Google it is this beautiful, serene plant just growing through the cement. Like somehow we always just persevere and everything is beautiful and magical, and we shouldn't care about the environment around us because we can find our tiny nugget of soil and be fine. When really, I think resilience is more about how can you navigate getting hit many different times and figuring out how you respond. So while we might not appreciate my image of the like bouncy back Bozo the Clown inflatable thing from some childhoods, that to me feels more like what the expectation of resilience is, that we just take a hit and keep on coming, and we do it with a smile on our face. And that's actually not how humans interact in the world, and nor is that a realistic set of expectations. So I want to talk for a minute about resistance or stressors, the things that activate these responses in humans. And this particular visual I really appreciate because it shows stress on a spectrum. And it also highlights that we have to have certain types of stressors to be either motivators or catalysts for change. And that in all reality, stress is happening to us all the time. But what matters most is the type of stress we're experiencing and the duration that we are under that particular stress. So on the spectrum, we have what is referred to as eustress, which is also like a good stressor. So eustress is this like moderate routine amount of resistance, difficulty, challenge that we have to deal with in order to make sure that we're paying attention to our environment and making sure that we're functioning in an effective way. And also it sort of contributes to our feelings of empowerment and success. If there was no resistance in life, we wouldn't grow. There is an opportunity to learn. Neurologically, brains don't change unless they're told or challenged or experience eustress, a difficulty to respond to. So in some realms, stress is actually a good thing. Again, the type, the duration, the ownership, the sense of change that we have over it is a huge factor. So we need to have good stress in order to grow. It's also how we develop mastery or new skill. We have to kind of put ourselves in uncomfortable situations and challenge ourselves with intention in order for growth. So eustress is a good thing. We like eustress. The tipping point refers to when those good stressors become not great stressors, and we move into what they refer to as distress. So a tipping point is going to be different for everyone. It's going to be different day to day or like challenge to challenge. Did I eat breakfast? Did I get a good amount of sleep? Is this something I think that I can have some influence over? Are all going to change where my tipping point feels like in those situations. So tipping points are kind of this like, oh, we went from like feeling like this is a good thing to like, I don't really know if I like it. Those are tipping points. We move into what they refer to as distress. So it's when all of the things that are happening to us become a little bit too much. We might start feeling overwhelmed. We might start feeling like anxious. This is probably the feeling most people refer to as like, I'm stressed, is distress, this like not good amount of things. And again, it's not necessarily like completely terrible to experience distress. Sometimes that's a motivating factor for us to make change. But if we're in that distress quite a lot or frequently, or we feel like we have no opportunity to move in or out of distress, then that's when it starts to become problematic for humans. And then the final stage of this continuum, they refer to as burnout. So this is like chronic intensity, like relentless amounts of distress. It's physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, it might be spiritual. They refer to it as fatigue from stress. And it's kind of in that burnout stage that we're like, generally as humans, we're like, holy crap, bad things are going on and I might need some help. So we also, I think, are conditioned to not reach out or feel like we need to make change until we reach this like, wow, this has been so overwhelming for so long. I'm in a burnout, rather than I'm experiencing distress and maybe I need to activate some resources. So on the spectrum, again, stress is always happening. There are different flavors, different intensities, and it doesn't necessarily matter the amount of stress you're experiencing, because everybody's under stress always, good, bad, otherwise. But more importantly, the duration of the more negative types of stress is going to be the thing that we refer to as like the bad stuff, or the thing that we are trying to guard against. So on this particular diagram, we have what they refer to as different responses to stressors. And this, I think, is a very representative diagram of what we expect people's experiences to be. So on the left-hand side, we have like stressors, and on the bottom, it's like duration over time. And our first point here is where we would experience a tipping point. So we're functioning along, we have some event that happens, and it sets us down. It puts us into distress. And the resilient response expectation is, once you experience distress, you're supposed to like pull yourself back up out of it and either return to your normal functioning, which this graph refers to as resilience, or if you improve your functioning, you're thriving. And if you experience a tipping point and you're in distress and your function decreases, they refer to this as surviving. I will redraw this graph for you later because I have a personal opinion about how it should look. But for the purposes of right now, we're functioning, we have a tipping point, we experience distress, and then the response is either going to be thriving, like, yay, we got better at what we were doing, maybe we made improvements. Resilience, they refer to as return to normal functioning, or surviving, as in now we're not as good as we were before because of whatever other things are happening. So again, reiterating, stress is going to happen. It matters most the type and the duration. And so I'm not going to like be here to tell you that you should never be stressed, because again, there's a part of me that wants you to. That's how we grow. But I think we are experiencing collectively a lot more of those negative types, and we are experiencing a lot more burnout of we're just navigating too many things at once. There are different ways that we measure distress or negative stressors. And I want to highlight that we can actually do that in both ways. So man or human versus their environment. So this could be literal or figurative challenges that we have to navigate. Generally, in human versus environment stressors, they're physical things that we're dealing with. So we're dealing with the outside environment, like weather, our lack of or return to sunlight. Perhaps it's like the amount of work or the hours of work that we're navigating. Maybe they are some of the social obligations that we have to go participate in. Perhaps it's some stuff that we're dealing with in our home life. So I recently moved out of town. We have a lot different kinds of chores. So my like human versus the environment is a more realistic, more forefront challenge for me lately, because we have to chop wood and haul water and navigate those things. So one of the categories of stressors that we as humans experience is human versus environment. Again, focusing on that being sort of the physical things that are happening or the physical challenges we have to navigate. There are human versus human conflicts, again, literal or figurative. These I refer to more often as the emotional like conflicts that we must navigate. So behavioral conflicts between people, interpersonal relationships, the fact that we have maybe different professional interactions than we did before, all of those things might be contributing to different flavors of stress. And in some cases, maybe it's a good stress. Maybe we've been forced to make a change that is actually positive, but it may also still be distress or perhaps burnout. Maybe we've had to navigate professional interactions in a way that are very different than we have before, and it's actually causing us to move into that distress burnout range. And human versus self. So again, these are literal or figurative challenges that we're navigating, and they refer to mostly the psychological challenges. So the way that I kind of quantify this is sort of like managing our own expectations and also managing the assumptions we make of others and the assumptions that we put upon ourselves from other people. So it's that stuff where we have all of that dialogue going on inside our brain. Those would be human versus self conflicts. And again, some of us might have different flavors or different levels of each of these conflicts, but in general, those are the three kind of categories of stuff that we have to navigate. So just to spend a little minute doing a reflection of like, what kind of conflicts are you experiencing for yourself? So which of those categories felt most fitting? Again, we're like coming into spring, so I'm quite excited that I won't have to chop wood and navigate snow and do physical challenges living outside or living more rural than I have before. Maybe you are experiencing more interpersonal challenges because we're navigating changing work environments, or we're navigating different ways that we communicate. Maybe you're experiencing more human versus self challenges, where I think a lot of us are trying to figure out and recalibrate how we operate in the world. So kind of just thinking about, did one of those feel more fitting? Did one of them feel like that was the one you're dealing with the most? What are the top 5 major conflicts going on for you right now? Thinking about what level of control you have over those particular conflicts. I don't have a lot of control over the weather, so I have to deal with what that comes at me. I can prepare better in that we can chop more wood and be more ready so we're not outside at -50 doing that, but also I don't have control over some of those pieces. And then I think the more important question is thinking about the relationship between the conflict and the sense of control we have to respond to it. So again, I can't control if it's going to be -50 or not, but I can control how much wood I have pre-chopped, or if I move a bunch of it inside, or all of those other layers where I can impact my comfort. I just want to ask, who else misses precedented times? I am becoming quite loath of the we're living in an unprecedented time, because I do wish that it was not true. If we reflect on the last 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, I think we're coming into like 30 months of this adventure, how has your resilience changed? Are there things you're doing more of? Are there things you're doing less of? And that can be any number of those categories. Maybe you're doing more physical things. Maybe you have more human versus human interactions. Maybe there's more time for you to have versus yourself discussions. I also want us to think about negative consequences to the last 6, 12, 24 months. And I want us to just like practice acknowledging but not dwelling on it. Like, yeah, stuff has been bananas and it has not been great. And there are many, many terrible things happening right now. But not dwelling is actually a skill we have to practice, because it will impact our ability to have resilient response, or to navigate moving from distress into less distress. So it's important to acknowledge that there's some like crazy shit going on, but it's not valuable to dwell on those things. And I'm going to hopefully give some tools to practice this in a minute. The first one and the immediate counter challenge is like, what have been positive consequences of that last amount of time as well? There have been things to celebrate, and how do we do that without feeling the guilt of all of it, which again is another skill to practice. So for example, COVID has had positive consequences to some of my professional realms, because it has forced us to figure out secured video. It has actually provided us opportunity to reach people in a more meaningful and direct way. Now there are folks in rural communities who are actually receiving regular support because we have the technology and the infrastructure to do that. It's positive. There's opportunity for people to flex their work schedules or to work more from home or to figure out some of that work-life balance because we've been forced into that. So as much as, yes, it has been absolute bananas for the last 2 and a bit years, there is actually some positive to pull out of that. And it's difficult to celebrate when we've had good things go on because there is so much other stuff happening. But that's part of the acknowledging without dwelling, is we're not going to throw a parade necessarily, but we do need to celebrate that sometimes we put into motion positive stuff for ourselves. So now what? How do we activate resilience? How do we get the two parts of us collaborating? How do we get the skills we know we have and our ability to feel confident doing that? How do we get them to talk to one another? Well, I'm going to remind us of this graph that I'm going to rewrite for us. So again, we're functioning along, we experience a tipping point, we have this reduction where we move into distress, and then we have responses to what goes on. They label them thriving, resilience, and surviving. And I 100% say that all of those need to just be labeled as a resilient response. So if you experience a tipping point and you move into distress, acknowledging that you're in distress is actually a resilient response, because we're giving ourselves credit for noticing that things have changed and that we don't like them. Because again, we've co-opted this resilient response to just be like, I'm supposed to smile when shit hits the fan. That's not actually how brains operate. It's not how functional things go down. And so I want to say, if you experience a tipping point that sends you into distress where it becomes a feeling of overwhelm, acknowledging that is a resilient response. And then however you navigate that afterwards is also a resilient response. So maybe you do have a tipping point, you move into distress, you make some positive changes, or you enact some things that are actually different, and you return to or you increase your ability to function. That's a resilient response. If you have distressful things go on and you return to just what was your previous functioning, I still think that's a resilient response. And in all honesty, if we experience distress and we have a tipping point that knocks us into what might be burnout, being able to say that that's not a sustainable way for us to function is a resilient response. So I think that this graph needs to be rewritten in my form as a way to acknowledge that however we navigate that stuff for us as individuals is actually our resilient response. And it matters less how functional we are to the system, because the system will always want more from us. We will never be able to give enough to the other parts. So being able to say, no, actually the resilience in me is saying that this is not sustainable and I'd like major change to happen, or some change to happen, or I want people to acknowledge this is unsustainable. Resilient response. We need to give ourselves more credit for navigating the last number of years of our lives. So how can we foster resilience? This is my completely stolen from, I would love to give credit, but I don't even know where it was from, poster of 8 strategies to increase our resilience. And I want to encourage folks to try one of them, not all of them. And I will reiterate that later. But I'm just going to go through each of these 8, give a few examples, and then task you with a challenge. So the first one is to practice optimism. And I want to highlight that that is more than just finding the positives. Optimism is actually the practice of acknowledging that stuff is tough and choosing to seek potential possibilities. So optimism isn't always just like rose-colored glasses and I have to silver line everything. Optimism is the like, yeah, shit's pretty intense right now and things are kind of messed up, and I want to figure out how I can navigate it. Optimism is not just like, everything is fine. Optimism is, it's bad and we'll figure it out. And that, I think, is another term that has been co-opted. This idea that, like, if you're optimistic, you just never acknowledge bad stuff. And that's not actually the way that it works. Brains don't do that well. They need to have a feedback loop completed. So when we say, wow, stuff is kind of messed up, if we don't acknowledge, yes, brain, I've heard you and I appreciate you flagging that, then it actually creates a circle for us that is anxiety provoking. So optimism requires acknowledgement. I want to focus on maybe we can try reassigning blame. So again, we have a bias to figure out things, and we generally give explanation for unknowns as something we've done. Brains do this automatically because, again, we're trying to close the feedback loop. So what do we have the most information about? Ourselves. Therefore, generally, when stuff goes bad, we're like, it's clearly my fault because I know the most information about me. But actually, that's most often inaccurate for us to say that we're responsible for all the stuff. Because, man, if I had as much control as my brain thought I did, things would be totally different. So being able to accurately assign blame or accurately assign the perpetrator of stressors is actually a skill that can help us feel more resilient. The next one is to celebrate your successes. So I want to just say you have survived 100% of the days you have endured thus far in your life, which is phenomenally cool. So what would year ago you be surprised about you achieving today? And I think this is a very fun exercise to do with ourselves, or to ask somebody who we really trust, what would top 5 achievements of yours be this year? Or even this week, because I bet you've done a lot of things this week that you don't give yourself credit for. You've learned a new skill, you've tried a new challenge, you reached out to someone, you did something really awesome. I guarantee it. We just need to figure out how we celebrate that, or better yet, to give ourselves permission to celebrate those cool things. So that's a resilient response, and that's something we can practice and foster. Giving to others, it's way, way easier to feel permission to serve or to support someone else than our own self. Generally because we're socialized to do that, but also there's some cool research to show that we actually get more immediate feel-good chemicals from helping out other people. Again, humans are social creatures, and we like to reward ourselves for being pro-social, positively social. So you can get some immediate feel-goods from helping out other people. The random act of kindness idea is actually really cool brain science. Narratives. So trying to navigate how we rewrite the stories we tell ourselves. So how we speak to ourselves, or how we allow our brain to speak to us, is actually pretty important. And one of the greatest questions that I have ever challenged my brain to answer is, who told me that? So when I start to personalize failure or blame myself for stuff that's going on, I have to ask, well, who told me that? And if it isn't one of the persons who's in my top 5 most trusted favorite people, I kind of have to throw it away. I crumple it up and I toss it out in my brain, because otherwise I'm just going to get bogged down and I'm going to have all of this negative dialogue in my own head. And I would never speak to another human the way my brain has the audacity to speak to itself sometimes. And that's an important thing to remind ourselves of. We are the stories we tell ourselves. Managing stress. This seems like the big one. And really, for me, this is about acknowledging what stress zone am I in, and can I change it? Because there might be times in my life where I'm experiencing stress or burnout, and I actually don't have the capacity to change it. There might not be anything I can do about that moment, but being able to be like, wow, this is some shit and I'll have to figure it out, actually helps our brain navigate some of that stress. Because again, our brain likes a feedback loop. It likes us to acknowledge that it's doing its job. So being able to recognize that, yeah, this is bad and we'll figure it out, or yeah, this is bad and I need some help, actually helps our brain kickstart some of that problem solving. So again, it's not about never experiencing stress, because sometimes being in stress is actually a positive. And there is actually some cool ways that we could hack moving from distress to eustress by intentionally challenging ourselves with new things. but that again is requiring an acknowledgement and is requiring us to navigate how much of this can I manage? Can I spend time in distress for that event, but not this other thing? Being able to be real with ourselves about that. Reaching out to other humans, finding people to lean on. I challenge you to figure out who your go-to people are. Who do you ask for help? And if you're like, I don't ask anyone because everyone's overwhelmed, I want to refer you back to that giving something else to other people. Asking humans for favors actually makes them feel good. So if we can ask for some help, we're doing twofold. We're getting some of our needs met, and we're also giving people an opportunity for those feel goods. How cool is that? Figuring out who your people are and how you could maybe grow that circle if you need to. And I'm not suggesting you need to have like 50 people that you can call at 2 a.m., but I am suggesting that you might have somebody that you reach out to with intention, because that's going to give both of you an opportunity to feel a boost. And then finally, moving outside of your comfort zone to your grow zone. So eustress is effective for change, and it is actually effective for growth. And we need to challenge our brain in order to rewire all of those neural networks. I'm not suggesting you need to go do like huge, extravagant, like ginormously big challenges. I am suggesting that like maybe this is a cool opportunity to try a slightly new skill. Learn to bake bread, try a new muffin recipe, walk a different route to work. Some of those things that are going to actually kind of give your brain a like, oh, we're doing something different, moves us into a grow zone. It also relates to that managing stress we talked about earlier. If we intentionally move ourselves into a like good stress challenge eustress zone, it can help our brain feel like we're in more control of the other elements that are happening for us. So I want you all to just pick one of these. And I mean it truly and for reals, only one, because we don't need to give ourselves 8 new challenges. We need to give ourselves one new challenge and try it out for a couple of weeks. And if you feel like that's going well, maybe you add a different one. Or if you try it for a few days and you're like, this thing is not working out and it's actually annoying me, great, throw it away, try a different one. Because again, that's part of the managing of stress. We want to feel like we're in control of the things that we're being challenged with, the things that we're putting up as challenges for ourselves. So again, pick one of these 8. Either it's practicing true optimism, where we're acknowledging things that are bad and choosing to look for the good, whether we're not personalizing failure, so accurately assigning who's causing all of the things to happen to us, remembering to celebrate success, maybe giving to other people, practicing how we rewrite our own narrative, so being very mindful of the stories we tell ourselves, managing stress and putting ourselves into intentional zones so our brain feels in control, leaning on others, and also figuring out how we move outside of our comfort zone. Pick one, give it a go. Use it, love it, don't love it, try a different one. There is no evaluation, but these are ways in which we can practice and foster and move forward with different types of resilience. The true kind where we're actually like navigating difficult stuff. Okay, I want to talk for just a quick minute about navigating our fuel tank. And what I mean by that is there again is this expectation that we're always going to be optimally functional, that we're always going to be so very prepared for any possible challenge or outcome. And that's really just not true. In a literal sense, when you fill up a gas tank, as soon as you leave the pump, you are already using it and you're no longer full. So for me, optimal functioning is about 3/4 of a full tank, meaning I'm doing stuff and I'm using it, because again, full tanks are like you're just sitting there not using it, I guess. 3/4 of a tank feels like my best optimal. I got lots of adventure left to go, but I clearly have been doing some things because it's getting used. And I like to think about how do I fill up my fuel tank as having sort of 2 streams, in that there are like longer term sustainable, like from the pump, bigger fuel up opportunities. Those for me are things like proper sleep schedule, actually eating breakfast, hydrating, making sure that I'm navigating the things that fill me up, like dog walks and coffee with friends. Whatever your long-term sustainable, makes you feel really good and grounded activities are, I like to think of those as like your more reliable fuel ups. They are what helps you fill your tank more sustainably and more completely. I also like to think about having kind of immediate fill ups. So those kind of emergency, I need a quick top up or a quick, like, get me back to my more sustainable fill ups. So like a fuel can, a jerry can. What are some of those activities for you? For me, those things are kind of like borrowing different time from other places. So maybe I am sacrificing some of my dog walk time to finish a work project, or maybe I am reducing a bit of my socialization so that I can read a book, or however that could look. What are the things that fill me up quickly? I'll also fully confess, these are things like coffee. They're like, how do you caffeinate your way through not having a sustainable sleep schedule? So being able to be real about, we sometimes do need to use those additional aids. If you are always filling up from a jerry can, that's not a sustainable way to keep a tank. So you might have to reevaluate or rework how you fill up in a like actually reasonable way. I also kind of like to think about having different fuel tanks for different parts of my life. So I have a professional fuel tank, I have a personal fuel tank, and if I'm stealing too much from one for the other, that's when I also need to reevaluate what my routine looks like. And there will be times when this happens, when you're like, wow, this cool work opportunity or this really stressful project, or we're in March and most of us work for an NGO, so we're all navigating the stresses of funding agreements. Maybe professional tank is taking more and we are borrowing from our personal tank. But if one is constantly sacrificing for the other, that's a thing that we might need to reevaluate. I also have somebody who refers to like having different tanks for different things. So they have like their personal tank with different compartments. And again, if we're stealing too much from one of those compartments for the other, that might be a sign that we are in too much distress or too much burnout, and it isn't sustainable. So this is another practice for navigating some of our resiliency, is being a bit mindful or a bit critical of how we keep our tank functional. How do we keep ourselves rolling? Okay, that is sort of the end of my portion of this. I would love to steal from people's brains, and I'd love to hear everyone's questions and comments. So I'm going to encourage us to stop the recording so I can steal from y'all.